Welcome to the Exhorter podcast. We're glad that you've joined us today. We aim to stir up love and good works through bite-sized biblical discussion. And I think that, Paul, you've got our topic for today, don't you?
I do. Today, we're going to talk about pornography. You know, this is a topic that I don't think we talk about enough. It's something that most every man deals with or has dealt with, and many women deal with. I want to begin reading a passage, Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 27. And this is when Jesus said, "You've heard that it was said, 'Do not commit adultery,' but I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to desire her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one of your members than to have your whole body thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better to lose one of your members than to have your whole body go to hell." Jesus didn't pull any punches when he was talking about not just sexual temptation, but really sin in general. You know, when you think about pornography today, it's different than pornography of a generation ago. It's everywhere. And you look at some of the stats, even I step back from pornography, you see nudity or sexuality in every TV show, every commercial. You're online and you're on social media. You're scrolling. It comes up everywhere. It's harder to avoid everywhere you look. When does it start? Just reading some of the stats that I was looking at. Typically, they say the average boy. So you think about your kids. When do they start? On average, 11 years old. So just think for a moment. That's the average. That means that sometimes it may start earlier than that. A generation ago, where did they find it? Well, if a parent or somebody they knew had a pornographic magazine or a videotape or something, today, every kid at 11 years old, they have a cell phone, many of whom have access to things that their parents don't even know how to use the phone half the time. And so it's everywhere. And so the access is more than it's ever been. When you look at how many, the stats of men, stats say typically on an ongoing basis, 70 to 75% of men are actively engaged in some kind of pornography at any given time. That's staggering if that's the case, 70 to 75%. But even more so is among Christians, it's really no different. And sometimes there's a view that, well, that's non-Christians. But I want to share with all of you and just have an open talk that I have talked to many men about this, many men in the church, many Christians, and I want to put it out there for those listening. This is a struggle that all of us have. This is a struggle that all men have, is overcoming sexual temptation and how to avoid pornography. So I want to ask all of you, when you think about the idea of pornography, is it the hush-hush topic? Why is it that we don't talk about it more?
I think of all the struggles that Christians experience, Christian men especially, I think this is the biggest elephant of all of them in the room. And it is very hush-hush. And we just don't want to talk about it, even though I think the statistics and studies you just cited tell us that we need to talk about it.
I think there's a tactful and appropriate way to talk about these things and to address them. And I think we need to do that more because there are, I think, especially young people, young men specifically, that struggle with this and think that they're alone and think that they're terrible because that they struggle with this thing and they don't know what to do. And they don't want to talk about it with anybody else because it's terribly embarrassing. And if those who've struggled with it and are older don't bring it up, it's probably not going to get brought up. And then the situation won't be addressed and they're still going to be struggling. And so, yeah, it can be uncomfortable, but I think it needs to be addressed and talked about, in the right way and trying to help.
Well, as parents, especially, you brought up, and that's the most shocking to me, is not necessarily how prevalent it is, but the age that kids are getting exposed to it or first seeing content of a pornographic nature. But this is where you talk about an awkward conversation. As a parent, no one wants to have that talk with their kids. But you know what? If you aren't framing sexuality in a biblical way and being proactive about it, your kids are going to have questions, and they're going to talk to their friends at school. They're going to ask Siri on their phone, whatever questions or curiosities they have. And who knows what kind of answers they're going to get or what things they'll find. So it's not the conversation you want to be having with your kids, but it's a conversation you need to have with them proactively.
I can also say that I've read and I've seen and I've heard about real situations of pornography in a marriage becoming a reason that led to divorce, and primarily men, sometimes men and women together. But it led to the end of the marriage or an empty marriage. But it's just something we don't talk about. Now, I think some of the problems in this sometimes is, what is the standard? Where do we go to the scriptures to talk about pornography? Does it speak to it, or where do we go? One passage that we sometimes read that makes me think, 1 Corinthians 6:18, Paul says, "Flee sexual immorality. Every sin a person commits is outside the body, but the immoral person sins against his own body." It's a sin against our own mind, body, and spirit. It binds, traps, wounds, and kills. If you think about what does that mean? Okay, practically speaking, I've got a vision of me seeing an image and running, screaming away, or how does that work practically? How do you flee? Because that's the word Paul uses. It's running away. Get away from that as fast as you can, as far as you can. Yet, let's be honest, what is our practice a lot of times? Let me see how close I can get. I'm mature enough to handle this. I can watch that TV show and it's a good story, even though it shows a lot of things that might today, or in the past, they would have considered it pornographic. Today, we've lowered our standards, I think, to think, well, but it's a good show. There may be music we're listening. I mean, these days, you can't even download a song. I was running with my wife this past week, and I made the mistake of I was bored with my playlist, so I just downloaded a playlist that was called Summer Songs. Boy, that was mistake number one, because on this run, what I downloaded contained music that I should not have been listening to, and I had to very quickly adjust as I'm running with my wife.
Do you share a playlist with?
I don't, but I very quickly told her, "Hey, this came up, and don't want to be listening to this." But what I was amazed was just how easy. It's like, there it was. And summer songs. Cool. Every other song was not just talking about sex, but using language, speaking about things and again, it was just, I thought, this is crazy. This just showed up on my watch. I'm on a run. I'm bored with my playlist. I clicked it. It was too easy. So I think we lower our standards. And even in that, I said, well, I need good music to run. We lowered the standards. So I want to talk a little bit about how can we avoid sexual temptation. So I'm going to go to the scriptures, but I want to ask you gentlemen, for yourself, are there any tactics that you might suggest for avoiding sexual temptation or pornography?
This is going to sound like a broken record, but start your morning with prayer, daily prayer, because the thing is, it's a heart issue because, okay, politics. We did an episode about politics recently, or maybe it'll be the next episode after this. I don't know the order you're going to put them out, John. But politics. Do we want a law that content bans certain content on TV? Well, okay, you take that content away. They didn't have videos or digital pictures 200 years ago, 300, 400 years ago. Do you think pornography or lust or things related to that wasn't a problem 400 or 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago? Can you find a point in human history where this wasn't a problem? It's not about the content that's out there or that makes it worse, the ease of access to the content, but it's not about the content. If you want it, you're going to go find it. So you have to not want it. And the whole point of prayer is it's not about bringing God into alignment with your will. It's about bringing you into alignment with his will. And prayer has a way of focusing your mind. So That is the most valuable thing you can do to start your day. Very first thing on your mind is God and his kingdom. And I think that's the best first step you can take.
That's a good one. Going to God in prayer, making sure that relationship is strong, because the closer you're feeling to God and being aligned to his will, the more you're focusing on avoiding anything that would get you out of that relationship with God.
And it's so simple. I don't mind being a broken record on it because it is so important and I think so overlooked. The value in just repetition, regular scheduled prayer will change your mindset and outlook for the day.
That's a good one.
So I don't know if this is so much avoiding that temptation as dealing with it, once it comes up, but having someone to be accountable to. The scriptures teach us to confess our sins to one another, and being able to open up to someone and say, hey, this is something I struggle with. And it's so helpful to know that somebody else knows, and that you're not alone. I just had someone come to me in the last month and open up and share that with me. Nate, this is something that I struggle with. And I know having that accountability with another person can be valuable and helpful. And also, text that person when you feel like you're being tempted in that way, or call them, or whatever it takes to overcome that temptation. And if you don't have a person to share that with or to be accountable to, then you're stuck on an island. And yes, you can pray, and that's such a valuable thing, but sometimes it helps to have another person to talk to. So
yeah, we are told to be humble and confess our sins to one another. And I'm afraid that we've bought into this concept that means coming in front of the whole church and telling everybody everything. And if it's not that, then I'm just going to keep it to myself. That because it's the fear of what will people think of me. That's what keeps people. And I'm not saying that it would be wrong to go in front of the church and confess your sins. I'm not saying that would be wrong. But I think we look at it as that's the only way to do this. That's the only way to confess my sins. And Nate talks about a more private one-on-one. You're talking to someone. And I think that has less of a fear factor. And that is completely following the scriptural pattern, even if it's just you going to, say, one of the elders or another person or a relative or someone that you feel comfortable with and can confide in. That is absolutely following the scriptural pattern to be humble and confess your sins.
I think when you say that, Nate, you really said two things. One, there's accountability. So I know someone's going to ask me about it or talk about it. But two, you don't feel alone and you realize, hey, I'm not the only one dealing with this. Number of years ago, there was a good friend of mine, and we would meet in the mornings and have a devotional and pray and also just talk. And we had questions that we would ask each other that really had to do with where we were spiritually. And it was just fantastic. We combined physical exercise in the morning with a spiritual devotional at the end. But we would ask these questions, and I know I've shared this with John and Kyle, and a lot of them had to do with just my week and where I was with God, including sexual temptation. The very last question, we would always laugh, but then we'd ask it again. And the question was, did you just lie to me? Or did you tell me the truth right now? Do I know everything? And we would kind of kid about it, but then we'd say, all right, I did have a struggle. And inevitably it would lead to a conversation that we needed to have. And somebody had suggested these questions, but it worked well to have real, honest, down-to-earth conversation. So I think that's a real good one. So, John?
Nate, I've known about your practice of accountability and before, and we talked about this. I think this is something everyone yearns for, but there's not like a model, or there's not like necessarily a taught model of accountability and pairing people up or figuring that out. But I do think we need to figure out how to do that more often, or even propose that as an option to our kids or, to people in general, because there is just something about removing the shame. That was one of the first points I think that was talked about here, is getting past that big elephant aspect and opening up the dialogue. To your point of what things people do and stuff, Similarly, when someone was confiding in me about their struggles too, we talked about access. I mean, you mentioned access not being an issue, Kyle, but in some cases, I think it is. If you have an addiction or you have a habit, you need to pattern interrupt, and you need to make it harder to access that. It's giving your brain that time and struggle, then allows you to break that cycle or to stop or slow the mental process down. Because we are talking about chemicals in the brains. We're talking about, dopamine. We're talking about things that physiologically happen in the brain. And what you need to do is you need to pattern interrupt is a big one, I think, for people who are struggling.
But the thing that comes to my mind, John, as you were talking, is phones. Where are most people accessing pornography? My guess would be it's on their phone. And there are certain apps that they're going to use to do that. So block those apps. Or when hey, it's after 9 p.m. and this is when I'm most tempted to do this thing. All right, well, set the permissions on your phone so you can't access that app after that point in time. And if you have an accountability partner, have them set the password. And those are some ways that, just practical things to do to say, hey, I've sat down and I've realized this is when I'm most tempted. Okay, so now we've identified where the issue is. Now let's solve that issue. And this brings up another topic that I think goes hand in hand with this and with prayer is knowing yourself. And a great way to know yourself is to journal. It doesn't have to be a lot, but just sitting down, just like you would in prayer, sit down for a few minutes and share with God what you're struggling with, what you'd like to see happen, what you're grateful for. Well, do some of that in journaling too. What did I do yesterday? Why did I do that? How did I feel while I was doing that or beforehand? And then if you do that for an extended period of time and you go back, what do you think you'll find? You'll find a pattern. And that's what we all are. We're all pattern-based creatures, even if we don't think that we are. We're all pattern-based, and you'll find a pattern. And if you find and identify that pattern, then you can find and identify ways to change that pattern.
Interrupt it. Yeah.
That's right. And pornography has an effect on the brain. Like, I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but it has an effect on the brain very similar to drugs and alcohol. And that's why it can be so powerful, because it is truly addictive.
So both of you talked about something about making it more difficult to access, and you talked about phones. So whether that's the time of day, whether that's where phones are used per se. So and that model, by the way, goes to protecting your kids' hearts and minds too. We just talked about young children accessing that. Where are they allowed to use their phones? Where are they not? For example, are they allowed to take their phones in their room alone or not? Is it a rule they just can't do that? John, to your point about a model, I don't know if there's any model, everybody can do their own thing. For me, it was at least once a week. I was checking in with that accountability partner. We matched it with something else, whether that be coffee or exercise or something. And we did it early in the morning where we had time, and it was a fantastic way to start the day, but it was also very meaningful. But it doesn't have to be that way. But that worked for me. And I knew once a week, we're going to be touching base. But I would also say, if you're listening to this and you're married, and everybody at this table is, that accountability, and hopefully your best friend is your spouse. And in talking to them honestly about that issue, that also includes, before phones, it was computers, and computers it was always about keeping computers open in public spaces. But phones, does your spouse have access to everything on your phone? If you're completely transparent, then they have all your passwords. They've got everything, because I've got nothing to hide. And to my wife, this is look at it anytime. And the same thing, of course, my kids know that's the rule too. I will look at your phone. I'm going to check what's on there. So that accountability should be there with your spouse too. It's open anytime. So I have a question for you guys. David and Bathsheba. Was it a sin when David looked at Bathsheba?
The first time or the second time? Sorry. Is it,
Well, you may be going exactly where I'm going, right?
I mean, it's impossible to avoid looking at certain things sometimes. The other aspect is returning to that.
Okay, so David is standing in a high place. Bathsheba is bathing outside, and he looked at her. Did he sin?
So I guess it comes down to like, did he know she was bathing? Like, yeah, I got that out of the corner of my eye. Oh, I didn't know she was bathing. Yeah.
Is this a situation?
You missed the spot.
Like you go to a crowded beach outside of LA in the middle of summertime. You're like, there are scantily clad women in here. Who knew? Who knew? Is it like that, or was he just genuinely like? Was that a common thing? Should he have known better? I've never known how to answer that, honestly. Being completely transparent, I've never known how to answer that question.
So, Paul, I think you're probably getting at the idea that we're humans, we're men. There is a sexual nature to us, and there are things that you see that you're drawn to. Oh, I kind of like that. And I think when that happens, it's important to realize, you're going to look again? Am I going to look a second time, or am I going to dwell on that? Because that's when those thoughts start to come up. You just start to dwell on it, and you go down that road of lusting after whatever it is you just saw.
Yeah, you hit it right away. And John, your first comment, okay, was it the first time or the second time, or was it dwelling on it? We all are going to come across situations, images, or people where it could create sexual temptation if we're not careful. David came across that. That in itself is not the sin, unless, to Kyle's point, I put myself in a place where I know I'm going to see it. But what he did next, whether he lingered, to your point, whether he knew that might be the case, and he continued,
when he inquired about her and sent for her, that was crossing the line.
Clearly, at that point, that was the case. But the key point is the imagery for a man in particular is a big deal. Knowing that, it's the idea of guarding our eyes. And so what should David have done? Well, we all know that's not for me to look at. That's another man's wife. I'm going back inside. So we see stuff all the time. I'm not a psychologist either, Nate, but there was a study in 2012. It said the more teenagers were exposed to sexual content in movies, the earlier they started having sex. Another study showed boys exposed to sexually explicit media were 3 times more likely to engage in sexual activity within 2 years than those boys who did not. Why is that? The sexual imagery has strong impacts on us. And so realizing that, our ability to guard our eyes, which means it's not seeing it, it's what you do next. So it's how you avoid that. So really that's the question. How do you guard your eyes?
Paul, so when you say guarding your eyes, it just reminds me, as a teacher, I've done a little bit of studying about, how we learn things, and we have our 5 senses, and that's how we intake information. And which of those 5 senses do you think we get most of our information from?
Smell.
Kyle, well, you live in Sanger.
Wow. At least I don't live in the ranches.
But it's our eyes. And I couldn't tell you exactly which study it was, but I think it said 80% of the information that comes into our brain comes through our eyes. And so it's so important that we do guard our eyes and watch what we see. Be careful about what we are looking at.
So one way that reading this book that was suggested that was interesting, they used the idea of, bouncing your eyes, that you come across something like that, you've got to quickly shift away, because the temptation is to linger, and then you're thinking about it. That is kind of how these things start, one step at a time. And they mention in the book, Job 31 and verse 1. It's a verse that you probably read many times, where it says, Job said, "I've made a covenant with my eyes. How could I entertain thoughts against a virgin?" In order to remain pure, he guarded his eyes to make sure. And I love that word. I made a covenant with my eyes. I will not allow my eyes to linger on this kind of thing. How do you do that? Every single opportunity that's there, you've got to bounce your eyes to think about that covenant.
Well, that's part of the daily prayer I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. When Jesus taught us how to pray, he said, lead us not into temptation. That's part of your proactive prayer for the day is you're already putting yourself in that mindset of, I've made that covenant with God. I've made that covenant with my eyes. I am a Christian. I wear the name of Christ out into the world, and I need to behave. I need to be holy because God is holy. And when you start your day with that, lead me not into temptation, you're already starting with that mindset, and that helps. It's not the whole solution, but it helps you start with the right mindset.
And Kyle, I think continuing prayer throughout the day as well. And so when we see that temptation walking down the street or wherever it is, and it catches our glance, then we say, God, please help me overcome this. Please help me find the way of escape of this particular temptation. And just, it doesn't necessarily have to be out loud. Say it in your head, but just ask for that help, and because he knows what you're going through.
Even David, who, as we talked about, knew a few things about this, Psalm 119:37, he prayed. He said, turn my eyes away from what is worthless. Revive me with your word. Paul understood that. I thought it, just reading it, thinking about what he had been through, he looked to prayer to overcome these things. And so when it comes to the idea of both pornography and sexual temptation, there's no, well, here's the silver bullet that takes it away from everything. But it's at the very beginning. It's what do you let into your mind through your eyes? And if you begin with that and say, okay, I'm not going to allow this from the get-go, you're going to stop it. You're going to choke it out from the beginning. But the more, I think the other thing, and I'll share this book that I read, it was called Every Man's Battle. They had a section in it where they talked about mixing our standards with God's standards, meaning, okay, I just read about what Jesus said that was comparing looking at a woman to committing adultery in my heart. But, as long as I can do this with a woman or look at a woman to this level, and that's not sin. Or I can do X, Y, and Z, and that's not sin. And in this book, all they did was they listed, 3 pages of what does the Bible say about sexual sin. And in the book, it was probably the most humbling and eye-opening thing to read, because we all know it, but reading them all together, it went through everything from the ones that we've just read to other things that talk about basically, this is your soul you're talking about. And every time it mentions sexual immorality, it uses words like flee. It uses words that talk about your soul is at stake. You could lose your soul if that's the case. You're to abstain from all sexual immorality, Acts 15:29. Flee from sexual immorality, 1 Corinthians 6:18. Or Paul in 2 Corinthians 12:21. He goes, I'm afraid that when I come again, I'll be grieved over many who have sinned earlier and have not repented of impurity, sexual sin, and debauchery in which they've indulged. I've read these passages many times, but there's pages of these passages that talk again. Colossians 3:5-6, put to death whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, which he calls idolatry. It goes on and on and on.
Why do you suppose there are so many?
I think he knew that this is something that's powerful. It was something that, I guess it also tells us it's not new. He was talking to people in the church and saying, I know you're dealing with this. I want to see it change when I come back. I'm afraid when I come back, you won't have repented from it. So that's interesting to me that this is not new. This isn't a 2023 problem we're dealing with. It was a first century problem. But even then, the Bible gives us solutions that apply today. So in closing this out, as men in particular, and if you're women listening to this, it is a temptation for women, but probably for men more so. For yourself, we've talked about guarding your eyes. We've talked about beginning the day in prayer. We mentioned in the last passage, just looking to the Word of God. Is there any other strategy? And we talked about accountability. Are there any other strategies before we end this episode that you'd like to send as a message to other men of all ages or boys who are listening to this to how we can be safe and avoid sexual temptation and pornography?
Especially to young men, I would just say stop now. Find help. Stop now. If you're a younger man, then your mind is at a place where it's more moldable than it will be when you get older. It's kind of like clay. When you're younger, the mind is pretty moldable, and as we age, it gets a little bit harder and a little bit harder and a little bit harder. And so it's not to say that you can't change patterns as you get older. You can, but it becomes much more difficult and more painful to do that. So just stop now, and don't be afraid to talk to someone you know, love, and trust about this particular issue. And if they're not comfortable talking about it with you, they can point you to someone who might be able to help. Yes, it's a shameful thing, but find the courage to address it. You won't regret it later. Someone told me one time it's a whole lot easier to not learn something now than it will be to unlearn it later.
Well, and taking Nate's comment and adding to it, I can't think of anything more draining to your spiritual vitality and your usefulness to the Lord than compromising with sin, any sin. And this is just one that we're very susceptible to. And a second point following after Nate's comment is about stop now. Don't make the mistake of thinking that marriage will somehow fix all of the problems. You want to have a handle on this before, because marriage won't fix everything. Marriage won't cause you to stop looking or lusting if that is a problem that you have, and it will just bring something into your marriage that will cause problems. If not immediately, it will eventually. So now is the time.
And I would just say one day at a time, small goals. I like the journaling bit. I like, these pen interrupts. Learn yourself, learn what you need and how you need, and have these conversations with your spouse, and repent, pray, and to seek forgiveness and to understand that you can be forgiven. One thing that will probably help people seek forgiveness and seek this accountability is for people just to really understand the struggle that it is. Understand that everyone has those thorns in the flesh. Everyone has one of those things that is strong to them. Glad we're having this conversation today, because I think that when you normalize these conversations, those elephants get smaller, and people will then start to work on themselves rather than just keep all these things in the dark.
Well, gentlemen, thank you. We barely scratched the surface of that topic, but we want to just summarize again. We talked about guarding our eyes, guarding our minds. We talked about accountability. We talked about regular prayer. If you're struggling in any way with pornography, we really want you to know that there is hope. You're not alone. And if you want to talk to somebody, talk to any one of us on this. We'd be happy to speak about it, let alone other members of the congregation at the church in Clovis.
Well, thank you, Paul. That certainly is, of all the elephants in the room among Christians, I think that might be the biggest that we just ignore, but shouldn't. So thanks for bringing attention to this very important topic. And as Paul said, if you want to reach out to any one of us, any one of the four of us, a confidant, someone to talk to, someone to get help or encouragement or need resources, we're here for you. So we thank you for listening today. If this has been helpful, please like, share, subscribe to our channel. New content every Monday.
Nate, do you want to lead us in? You just read this right here.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Welcome to the Exhorter podcast, where we talk about biblical stuff, and we aim to stir up love and good works through bite-sized biblical discussion.
Okay, you're off the show.
Okay, all right.